I'm Peter Kindfield. I'm the principal, janitor, science teacher, et cetera, at the farm school. And we also have a homeschool satellite program. I think that we're sort of the one lefty satellite campus program in Tennessee. And I encourage those of you who homeschool to find us on the web or talk with me about it more. I want to share a story with you just to, in contrast to the story that we just heard. One of our favorite games at the farm school is called Cops and Protesters. And this is a game that is really called Cops and Robbers, but we had an intern at our school, and he knew that Cops and Robbers just felt too violent to me. I'd already said, no dodgeball. And so he knew he had to sort of modify the game. And he said, but Peter will go for Cops and Protesters. So this game has become, one of the things we love to do at recess. And what's really, I refuse to be a cop. The kids talked me into it once, and I walked around and asked people if they wanted to be arrested, if they needed a home, if they needed a meal for the day, and they said, Peter, you can't be a cop anymore. So I always played protester, and the thing that is brings the most joy to my heart when we play that game is the littlest kids just love to arrest me. It just is. And to be brought to jail by these two tiny people, just sort of reveling in their own power and their own equality is great. And this has nothing to do with anything, but it's a little bit funny. Once we were playing the game, I like to try to teach a little social studies when we're doing it, and so I was talking to this one child who was bringing me to jail and saying, why are you bringing me to jail? Don't you realize that this is a protest? I'm protesting for children and women's rights. And I was going on and on like this, and the kid finally looked up at me and goes, Peter, it's just a game. So, strangely, as a teacher, I'm a little nervous up here today. I'm not used to talking for very long, even though I teach. I tend to teach in little snippets, and it tends to be super interactive. So if I get a little funny, just interact some with me, and it will bring me back. I also want to let you know that I'm going to sort of set a little bit of theory stage, and my intent was to talk not so much about the school, although I'll have examples from school, but I want to talk about this idea of putting our differences together. And I want to give you a little bit kind of my path, how I came to sort of the theoretical whatever view that I'm going to put forward. And I also want to let you know I'm really looking forward to the discussion part, because I love building knowledge with others, and I think that will be a lot of fun. So when I was an undergraduate, I studied individual differences in psychology, and one of the things I found frustrating about it is that people would always talk about their favorite individual difference as if it was the difference between people. And what I got out of that study was that there are thousands of individual differences that are documented, and that there are an infinite number of ways that humans are different. And that where we are on all these different dimensions kind of, it's just that it's a very large space, and there's room for folks who are of different race, of different sexuality, of different cognitive style, learning style. There's just millions. And it's interesting to me that sort of we all are very comfortable with the idea, or our society in general is comfortable with the idea that every snowflake is unique, but the idea that every human is unique seems to get lost in our current cultural story, which is one of the things I'm going to talk about in a little bit. The next stop in terms of my thinking about individual differences and diversity was I went to a conference, and the idea of the conference I think was great, and the title was Dealing with Diversity. And the idea was that we have classrooms and kids are different, and somehow this is a problem, and we have to figure out how to deal with it. And I sat through a bunch of very interesting talks, but the whole time my mind was going, why is this a problem in school? Diversity is a reality everywhere. Every member of every species is different from every other member. Every snowflake is different. Every child is different. Why is diversity something we need to deal with? And I ended up coming to a place where I think that our schools are, in general, designed to replicate our cultural story. And our cultural story right now is one of conformity. And so that's why diversity is an issue that we have to deal with. And it was interesting because people's talk about how to deal with diversity was basically to smaller and smaller boxes. So I heard talks about how to teach Chinese kids and how to teach African American kids and how to teach kids in a gender diverse class, and it just, the idea of smaller and smaller boxes just didn't make sense to me, right? The idea is let's make the box big enough for all of us to fit into, and that's something I'll talk more about. So, sort of, number one fact, everyone's different. Number two, we're social creatures. We like to be together. We like to be together in families. We like to be together in couples. We like to be together in families of all kinds, and villages and communities of all kinds. And when you put these two things together, the fact that we're all different and that we like to be together, bumping into each other is inevitable. There's a natural tension, I think, whenever you have folks who are different, or even parts of any system that are different. Once they become a whole, there are constraints on their behavior, and there are going to be some jingle and jangle. Those of you who are married, I'm sure, are aware that even with somebody who you deeply love, right, you bump into each other, and there's work to do around that. So one way of talking about that is a tension between me and we. And that tension, there's kind of there's different ways to resolve. And I want to talk a little bit about an idea. I have a book I want to recommend, which is A More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And it's by a man named Charles Eisenstein. And he sketches out these different sort of cultural mythologies that he says underlie everything. And in his version, there was first a story of interdependence, pre-agriculture, that everyone believed we were all part of something larger than ourselves. And that then this led to, after agriculture, it changed to a story of separation. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of those stories. And then that we're headed back into a time of interdependence, or a time of we. And his point is that it's that change in story that's going to really propel us that's really going to save us from the mess that we've gotten into with the current me story. I have a little bit of a twist on that, in that from my point of view, the original story was not so great because we totally dominated. So pre-agriculture, lots of cultures didn't even have a word for I. Okay, so for me, that first story was one of just everyone together, and I think also with a lot of conformity. The next story is the story of separation, the post-agricultural story, and he characterizes that point of view, and see if you recognize something from our own culture in this point of view. So the assumptions of this story of separation that he sees us as now about to change out of, but we're currently immersed in, goes like this. Each of us is separate from each other and the world around us. We are programmed by our genetics to fight for survival. It is, after all, a dog-eat-dog world. The purpose of life is for each of us to get what we can for ourselves. Since there's only so much to go around, what's good for you is probably bad for me. And we may have evolved from animals, but we are now better than them. We're not going to rescue little bugs off the floor like we did here. They're kind of beneath us, and we can and have shaped the world as we have liked, becoming masters of the planet, and the best thing for us to do is complete our conquest. And Charles' point of view is that that story has led us to the edge that we're now facing, where the planet is struggling, where people are struggling, where poverty is on the rise, income gap is on the rise. And Charles is making the point that it's this belief system that has led us here. And obviously, that belief system stands in stark contrast with the UU principles and values, and stands in stark contrast to what we're trying to do at the farm school. So for me, the next step in that story, the next step is not simply a return to the pre-agricultural, we are all together. This new story, from my point of view, is a story of holarchy. And holarchy is a fancy word that basically means parts come together to make wholes at all kinds of levels. And one of my favorite places to talk about that is in the field of biology. So the social Darwinists created their story of evolution, which was, or their story of how beings operate together, this dog-eat-dog kind of world, fight for the fittest, it's all about competition. And what's interesting to me is that you can look in any biology text and find that that's not the current story in biology. One of the most major steps in evolution, it was the evolution of eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells, the current theory, is formed from bacteria coming together and collaborating. Now that's a nice anthropomorphic spin, and the actual looks like more, it was actually a failed attempt at digestion on the part of one bacteria trying to consume another. But in the end, we have this whole new form. We have these complicated cells. Most people now believe that the step from plants making it onto land never would have happened if it wouldn't have been for the fact that plants form relationships with fungi. And that, in fact, it's that collaboration that enabled plants to first make it on Earth. And one of the things I like to talk with the kids about when we're in the woods is that when you see a forest, all of those trees are interconnected with mycorrhiza, with a collaboration between the fungus that actually gets into the roots of the tree. And the result of that collaboration is the fungus gets sugar from the tree, and the tree gets water and nutrients from the fungus. And that just happens everywhere. So cooperation is way more the rule in nature than this, constant fight. Probably the two most important metabolic processes that happen on the planet are photosynthesis and respiration, and they perfectly complement each other, so that what we produce as waste becomes the input to the plant that it builds itself from. And to me, that's just a miracle. I like to take the kids out and just have them breathe on a leaf and talk to them about the fact that as they're standing with their face next to that leaf, they're feeding the tree, and the tree is feeding them. So, now to sort of get back to human collaboration and how humans fit into this holarchy. How many of you have heard the story of the 6 blind men? So, it's a very interesting story. It has a lot of tellings in different cultures. And the basic idea is there's these 6 people walking through the jungle, and they're non-sighted, and one of them bumps into something, and then the next bumps into something, and pretty soon they've all bumped into something, and they get into a discussion. What is it that we've just bumped into? And one of them says, we bumped into some kind of pillar, probably in a mansion. It's big and round and sturdy, and the next one says, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm holding on to this long thing. It feels kind of like a whip or something. And someone else says, what are you talking about? It's a hose. It's this big long hose. And then another says, I don't know. There's like a roof here, so maybe it's a house, right? And so they're each holding on to a different part of the elephant. And what's interesting in the different tellings of this story is that in some versions it's never resolved. The moral of the story is, oh well, people see things differently and they can never put their differences together. And in other versions of the story, the version that I prefer, they figure it out, right? And they're able to talk with each other, put their points of view together, and now construct the picture that, oh, this is an elephant. For me, when I was younger, I used to think that that was kind of automatic, this putting together of our differences. It was kind of just like, everyone's different, and we're social, so we come together and we put and it just kind of happens that we can put our differences together. I've been married for 25 years, and in that very loving and close marriage, I've come to learn that putting our differences together is not that simple. It actually requires a fair amount of thought and orientation, and I want to talk about some of those things, that putting our differences does take. And my other experience is that has led me to believe that it's not that easy. As I think many of you know, that I'm from the farm in Summertown, Tennessee. It's an intentional community. And in my 11 years living there, I've also learned that there's a lot of work behind putting our differences together. It is in no way automatic. So the question then is, how do we do it? How can we put our differences together? Oh, I'm sorry, I want to read you one more thing, is that since I read you the sad story of separation, here's the way that Charles Eisenstein talks about the story of holarchy. Each of us is inseparable from each other and the world around us. We, like every other living thing, are made up of parts that go together to make us and the other parts into something larger than ourselves. Each of us is gifted. The purpose of life is for each of us to express our gifts and share them with the world. The more we give, the more there is. Does this story sound nicer and more familiar to you guys? We share the world with millions of species of living beings. The best thing for us to do is to join with all those species in sharing our gifts for the betterment of us, humanity, and the planet as a whole. So his point, and I think it's a powerful and true one, is that the stories we believe create our reality. And the example that I want to use is one is driving a car. So I have had opportunity in my life to commute in some of the worst commutes in the country, in New York and in the Bay Area. And I guess it's maybe not telling in this kind of church, but I have a confession to make. I drove like a asshole for most of my life. I had a commute that I would leave before rush hour to get to work, and I would try to leave work again before the afternoon rush hour. And so I felt like each second I lost put me deeper and deeper into rush hour. And I'm embarrassed to say that it got to the point where I ticked somebody off enough that they were following me, and it was like, I was all ready to sort of do the pullover on the side of the road, road rage thing. It's part of why I moved away from the city. Part of it's context. But also part of it is learning. I made a conscious choice at some point that I had been driving just like the story of separation said I should, right? If somebody else got ahead of me, I was losing. If somebody was tailgating me, I'd slow down to show them, what I wanted, and sad story. So at some point I changed my mind, and I started driving like I wanted everybody. I realized I want everybody to get home safe. I don't care if they're drive like a jerk and they're tailgating me. I want them to get home safe. They might be tailgating me because they're in a hurry to get to their family, or maybe not. But for whatever reason, I wanted them all to be safe. And so I started driving like I wanted us all to get home safely. If somebody pulled up next to me, I would slow down so that they could get around me. If somebody was tailgating me, I would pull over so that they could get by. Who was I helping by slowing down and making them angrier and angrier? And my world changed. Driving became something not nearly as horrifying to me, and certainly not a thing that would introduce me to this person who I didn't want to be. So I think that we can use driving as a metaphor, that really part of learning how to put our differences together is changing the story that we tell ourselves. And one of the things I'm super encouraged by is that the story that this group tells themselves is way more the story of, we're all different and we can put our differences together. And I think that in terms of learning how to do that, that's where it starts, is getting that story. And so one of the things we do at school is teach to that story, is when we teach science, we teach about collaborative integration. When we talk about social studies, we talk about movements that have succeeded because people work together. Okay, so I have this, what I want to talk about now is a short list of practices, things that I consider techniques or ways in which we can learn to put our differences together. And what I'm hoping we'll do some in the discussion time is maybe add to this list, because it's very much just something in formation. So one of the things that happens at school a lot is kids will ask me to make some kid do something. Make them stop, make them be their friend, make them do whatever. And when they say that, I look at them and I smile and I say, honey, they can all imitate my honey really well, it's funny, but I say, honey, I have enough trouble controlling myself. I can't change other people. And the idea that there is no remote control, I think, is super, super important for us, right? The changes that we can make, we make in ourselves. I teach Tai Chi, and one of the things we do is called push hands. And we'll do these little practices as a pair, like we'll just move like this, and the idea is to just maintain contact with our hands. And especially with couples, this always happens, I love this. I give the instruction that maintain a contact point so that you could keep a butterfly between your wrists, but you wouldn't hurt the butterfly. And with couples, invariably, one member will say, you're pushing too hard, right? And it's a funny thing, right? Because a contact point is a contact point. And so we like to go to that, you need to change. But the truth is, the only thing we can do in that situation is change ourselves, right? So if somebody's pushing too hard, you just move a little quicker, and that softens the contact point. And I think that just understanding the idea that we only have direct control over ourselves, that yes, we can influence each other, but we don't do that by changing other people. We do that by changing our own behavior. One of the things that I think is a struggle at the farm now is that on the new farm, people don't do as much together as they used to. And one of the things that I notice is the people who I do things with, I have a horse, I have some friends who have horses. Just the fact that we do this work together brings us together. And in school, one of the things we do a lot to sort of build on that is we do group projects. So we have kids work on projects together, building structures, even sort of describing areas of knowledge by each working on their own area and then bringing those things together. So it may seem obvious, but I think one of the things that really helps us learn to put our differences together is just having the opportunity to do things together, even something as simple as building a fence. I already mentioned the idea that believing a hierarchical story is super powerful. And this, the idea that believing a hierarchical story is powerful comes from the idea that just what we believe is powerful. So one of the things we do at school, and we'll talk about this more, is we express gratitude. It's like when you guys do share your joy. We have a time and circle where we share gratitude. And when my belief is that by expressing gratitude, it changes our belief system to see more abundance, to see more good in the world, and that changing our belief systems really does change the world. So, I know that you guys sit in circle at the end of, at the second half of the meeting, and I think that circle is just one of those practices that's super, super powerful. And it's ironic to me, when I was in graduate school, I had a friend who did his master's paper on seating arrangements, and I was involved in, all this lofty rhetorical analysis, silly stuff. But I sort of looked down my nose at my friend who was doing, so focused on seating arrangements, and it's become one of the things that's central to not just what we do at school, but also we do a program called Kids to the Country, where we bring inner city kids out to the farm in the summer to have a nature experience. And when I asked one of the returning kids to talk to some new kids who were coming about what we did, and I was looking for him to say things like, we ride bicycles and we go to the swimming hole, and the kid went, we sit in circle, and we sit in circle, and we sit in circle. But it's a very, very powerful thing to have an arrangement where we all are equal, where we all can see each other, where we all can hear each other. Lately here's another idea in terms of how to put our differences together. And again, it's a change in belief. I was struck relatively recently by the amount of time I spend thinking about people I know and how they could be different from the way they are. And it's a pretty insidious habit. And then I thought, I've never picked up a rock and gone, I wish this rock were softer, bigger, redder, whatever, right? It's the rock that I found. It is what it is. And I have been trying to focus every time I catch myself wishing somebody I knew was different, and just reminding myself that they are who they are, at least for now, and that my hoping they're different is not going to help us put our differences together, be accepting who they are is. The flip side of this story was I related that parable on the Book of Faces recently, and that's a joke of a best friend of mine who passed a couple of months ago, so I'm really happy to hear people laugh at it. I love that. So I posted on the Book of Faces this parable about the rocks, and somebody wrote in and said, yeah, but I spend a lot of time sorting through rocks. And I think that's okay. I mean, I really do. I think it's okay to find a rock and go, this, I run into people who I have views that are very different from mine, that are, include violence or whatever, that they're hateful and angry, and I want to be able to accept them, but I also want to be able to sort of put them back down and walk away, right? We get to collect the people who we want to be with, and I think that that's okay. And along those lines, I think choosing our influences is really important, and it's something that I personally learned, way after my teenage years, that it's really important to pick who I want to surround myself by, and who I want to take advice from, and who I want to have those deep conversations with. There's a lot of folks who talk about this idea, and it's connect versus control. By the way, I said I was going to struggle, Charity, right, to talk for 20 minutes, and I'm just about out of time, and I could just keep going. So the connect versus control is a super important thing, and it's something that Ann and I talked about very deliberately in our parenting. That, again, back to the idea that you can't control other people. What you can do is connect with them and make deep connections. And we basically made every parenting decision that we made together based on how can we maintain contact with our children. How can we remain connected with them? And I got to say that we're far from perfect parents, but our children have remained very, very connected with us. I'm thinking our 23-year-old son drank a little too much about a week ago and was feeling very ill the next morning, and he came in on Saturday morning and climbed into bed with his mom. Pretty sweet. We talk about listening as a learned skill at school, and we spend a fair amount of time working with the kids. We spend time in circle, we do check-in, and I'll talk about how we do circle in a minute. But one of the things that we constantly remind the kids about, they tend to sort of do their turn or anticipate their turn, and then they check out, and we talk about them regularly about that you're doing one of two things in circle. You're either speaking or listening, and listening is the more important one. If you're a great listener, you'll never have a shortage of friends, and it really is. It's a learned skill. Practice gets you there, and it's just obviously super important in terms of learning to put our differences together. So we do circle at our school. It has 4 parts. We talk about how we're feeling. We express gratitude about something. We make requests of the group. I have a headache, please talk quietly when you're around me, or anything like that that has to do with how you're feeling. And we make requests of the universe, or prayer, if you will. We ask the universe for things that we desire, that we want, that we don't know exactly how to get there. I ask for world peace. The kids often ask for things like they want it to rain cats and dogs. We have conversations about why it wouldn't be so good if it rained cats and dogs, but that's the structure of our check-in. And the kids facilitate our circle in the morning. And I've seen some amazing things. I've seen a child who was still nursing facilitate circle. And to see this kid on her mom's breast and then turning her head and going, "Any announcements?" And then going back to nursing was just it's pretty cool if you can learn how to do that at that age. And we have one kid at school right now who I'm going to use a made-up name for, Rose, who loves to facilitate circle, and she has a speech impediment. And she's super loquacious and has an incredible vocabulary, is super smart, but she's hard to hear. And I take such joy and have such happiness that all of the kids have basically learned how to speak Rose. We can all understand her because we want to catch the magic gems that come out of her mouth in circle. And again, that's putting our differences together. Our governance at school is, I'm just going to zip through the last 3. We make agreements and we keep them. So we're a self-governing school. We make the distinction between agreements, which are between people, and rules, which are imposed by one on another. And we see our governance structure as another way of putting our differences together. Our conflict resolution strategy, if kids get into it with each other, we don't look at the last thing that happened. You know, somebody yelled at somebody. We try to look at everything that went into that, and we sit down with the participants and we work it through. We ask them what happened. And the general process is start with yourself if you're in conflict. Is this something I need to involve anybody else in? If it is, I'm going to go talk to them. If that doesn't work, I'm going to get help. If that doesn't work, I'm going to get more help. And ultimately, we end up in a big meeting. And much as I say we don't do punishment at the school, when I say to the kids, should we have a meeting about that? I think they sometimes might see it as punishment. And the last thing I want to mention is that we do service is a big part of our school. And my favorite aspect of that is that most of our students work as counselors in the summer in the Kids to the Country program. And they are so incredibly, once they start working as counselors, they're so incredibly motivated to help each other and to help the kids that come out from the city. And it's really amazing to see the transformation. Anne can tell you how eager they are to do math all the time. But they really are eager to get to work and to get as many hours as they can when they're working as counselors, because they found the joy of service. And that's just another in that list of ways that we can learn to put our differences together. So thank you all for listening to me talk for way too long, and I look forward to now talking with you after our break and during our break.